Today I'm going to show you how to replace an alternator on this 2007 Cadillac CTS with the 3.6 liter. Disconnect the battery using an 8mm. Remove the engine cover by first removing the oil cap. And just grab it and pull it up. It's held in with little clips. Just work it from the brace. And put the oil cap back on. And there's your alternator down there. Now remove this intake silencer box. 8mm hose clamps. Pull this PCV breather hose from down there. Loosen this hose clamp. Separate that air tube. Get that out of there. Now rotate the belt tensioner to release the tension on the serpentine belt with a 1/2" drive ratchet, and then just pull it off the alternator. There we go. Just to give some extra room to work, let's remove the ECM, push these clips in, and then slide this connector up. It's going to be really stuck. These things have never moved before. They're going to be a little stuck. There. Slide that all the way back. Pop that off. Same thing for the bottom one. And get these things moving. Out. Now remove this ground connection with a T25 Torx bit. Rid of the wire, and I just put this screw back in there. Now remove the 4 10mm bolts that hold the ECM in. Now put this ECM somewhere safe. Now remove the belt tensioner. It's middle 15mm bolt. Now you're gonna have to remove this alternator heat shield. It's held in with 3 10mm bolts. The bottom bolt is not so easy because you can't see it. You can get it out by feel. Just get the ratchet on it. Use this hand, hold the ratchet on the bolt. Rotate it. I know it's impossible to see. I can't even see it myself. There we go. There we go. And the last bolt is on the back side of the lower one. It's kind of the same deal as this other bottom bolt. You can't see it, but you can feel it. So get the ratchet on top of it. Just work your hands in there. Hopefully you have small hands that fit in there. And you just gotta work by feel. There, heat shield off. Now the bottom 2 alternator bolts are tricky, but you can get them. Again, you can't really see them. So on the back bottom one, there's 2 bottom bolts. Let's just take a regular 15mm socket. Wind it with your finger. And then just get the ratchet on there, get the socket on there. Just remove it. One bolt down. Now you can either take a 1-inch extension or a 15mm deep well socket. Usually reaches to get the front bottom bolt off. It's kind of recessed. This just gives you barely enough room to get on it. Once you get the bolt out far enough, it's going to try to pin the ratchet between the bolt and the body metal, so you can switch back to a regular socket, or if it's loose enough, turn it with your fingers, but this one's not loose enough. And be very careful around these ABS lines. Bolt number 2. Now finally the top 15mm bolt, the easiest one of all. Get on there and turn it. Give the alternator some support while that bolt comes out so it doesn't fall and bend these ABS lines. I just kind of pull the alternator out. Be very careful around the ABS module. And you can see it back there. There's an electrical connector for the regulator and the output line. I'll try to rotate the alternator to where you can access the regulator connector. It has that black plastic connector. There's a tab that faces the back of the alternator. Just push that in and then pull the connector out. And that's the connector and the tab. Now you have to disconnect the charging line, the big thick positive wire. It's held on with a 10mm nut. So remove the plastic boot that covers it. I ended up just tilting the alternator forward and using a long extension to get to that 10mm nut. Pull the charging lead off. Now, just pull the alternator out. You're gonna have to remove the rest of this air cleaner boot. I'll just grab the alternator, pull it out of there. And there it is. And I can't stress enough how careful you have to be around these ABS lines. Bend those, it's gonna be bad. Take the new alternator and orient it to roughly the same position as the one that came out. Get it in there. Just carefully work it into place. Don't force anything because you might be bending an ABS line. There we go. Now get the electricals hooked back up. Starting with the charging lead. It's hard to see, so you're going to have to work by feel. Get it on the post. Thread the nut on. I'm going to use my long extension to get down there and tighten it. And then pull the boot back over the charging stud. I know this stuff's hard to see, but it's hard to see in real life too. Alright, now take the regulator connector and then plug it in. You'll hear it click when it's fully seated. Alright, everything's connected. Start bolting it back on. Start with the top bolt. Let's get the bolt in place. Start it a couple of turns. Now don't tighten this bolt yet until you've gotten the other 2 bolts in and started, but just crank it down to where it'll pull and hold the alternator. Just kind of like that. where it's still loose, but it's not falling off either. Now the two bottom bolts, you'll notice they're different lengths. The shorter one goes in the front. I always spray these with WD-40 just to make it easier to thread them in by hand. I'll start with the front bottom bolt. You're gonna have to shake and wiggle the alternator a little bit to get it to find the threads, and then just kind of shake and wiggle the alternator the whole way while you're finger tightening the bolt. Just get it to run down as far as you can by hand. Same deal for the back bottom bolt. Go. Once they're all in, just start torquing them down. I start with the top bolt since it's easiest to reach. Switch to your deep well 15mm or 1-inch socket extension, and do the front bottom bolt. I know I keep saying this, but it's even more important while you're tightening down the alternator bolts to be very careful around these brake lines, because ratchets have a tendency to slip off of bolts and then you're coming down full force on these little tubes. Once all three of the bolts are torqued down, then you can put the heat shield back on. Just lower the heat shield into place, and I always start with the top bolt. Just thread it in there, but don't tighten it yet until you get the other two started. Now the tricky ones. One's in place, you've got to work blind. I always say an automotive technician would make an excellent blind person because they're so used to working by feel as it is. I don't think I'd have any trouble at all being a blind person. Alright, now the final bolt. Okay, once they're all in, start cranking them down. Small ratchet, 10mm. I start with the top one. Now the bottom two. The ones you can't see. There. And finally the back one. There. And now the alternator is in. Reinstall the belt tensioner. Take note that this dowel pin has to pilot into its respective port. And then just thread the bolt in. Leave the belt tensioner a little loose because you're going to have to slide the belt back behind it. So take the belt, smooth side, run it around the tensioner like that, and just untwist it. It's kind of twisted. Alright, and then go from the belt tensioner to the alternator to around the water pump, and finally the crank pulley. And I usually just throw the belt off the alternator to get the belt around the crank pulley. There we go, make sure it's fully seated. And then you can crank the bolt for the tensioner down. Right. Now take your 1/2-inch drive ratchet and then crank down on the tensioner, and then throw it around the alternator pulley. release tension. Go around the belt, make sure it's in every pulley and it's not hanging off. Right, this looks good. Now take the ECM and make sure you install it in the same way you took it off. Usually with this barcode label on top, and usually the ground connection is there in the upper right hand corner. Start the bolts. Now just torque them down. Don't make them terribly tight. It's just aluminum. Now the T25 Torx grounding screw. Crank that down. I kind of dust off these connectors. They slide easier without dust, obviously. Alright. Start with the bottom connector. Make sure these are all the way out. Ready to go in. Slide the connector on and then pull this lever back, and it will pull the connector towards the ECM. Same thing for the top. Just like that. Just loosely reinstall this air duct. Don't tighten it yet until you get the silencer box in place. Drop the silencer box down there. Get that in place. Don't forget to reconnect the PCV breather tube. Let's get everything in position. Once everything's in place, start tightening down the hose clamps. 8mm. Now take the engine cover, flip it over, and I hit these rubber grommets with WD-40. It helps aid in reinstallation. And there's one that stays on the intake. Hit that one too. Now remove the oil cap. Slide the engine cover underneath the strut brace. Kind of locate those rubber grommets. Get those down. Put the oil cap back on. Reconnect the battery. Test it out. No more battery light. Alternator output's good. You are done. If this video helped you, please consider supporting the channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Thanks for watching.